Let's open up the Epic Hero Series 4-inch figure of Darth Maul.
Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it.
Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. As a fan and collector of Star Wars action figures, it's quite an exciting time for me here in New Zealand because we have two different product lines giving us new Star Wars action figures, as well as the newest wave of vintage collection 3.75-inch figures hitting New Zealand stockists. We now have a new wave of the Epic Hero Series 4-inch figures also by Hasbro. So I picked up a few that caught my eye, including this Darth Maul figure. I think this one's really interesting. For the most part, the Epic Hero Series line features characters as seen in Disney Plus streaming series like The Mandalorian, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the Ahsoka live action. But Darth Maul, as he appears here, this is his Phantom Menace outfit. So this is a little bit of a deviation from that trend, which is really quite fun. And personally, I love the prequels, so I really was keen to pick up Darth Maul, and I can't wait to open him up. I do have a Phantom Menace era figure to do a little bit of comparison there as well. So thanks so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll take the figure and the accessory out of the packaging so we can take a closer look. But first, let's take a quick look at the backing card. The Epic Hero Series toy line is of course aimed at younger collectors, but I really like the vibrant packaging colors here. We've got strong blue and yellow accent colors and some really fun drawn character art down the side. We've got a nice clear readable Star Wars logo cutting into Darth Maul's shoulder here just a little bit, but I really like this side art, a really sort of classic intense Darth Maul image there. And we can see we've got a nice clear bubble showing the figure inside, a little bit hidden across the lower half of the body with the nameplate, very readable, nice and clear, Darth Maul against that yellow banner there. We can see the series logo a little bit hidden here on the side, Epic Hero Series, and it also notes that these are 4-inch figures or 10 centimeters tall, being a little bit larger than the standard action figure line, which is noted as being 3.75 inches. I do have one to compare because I'm curious to see how tall this one's going to look alongside other figures. The line is noted as being appropriate for ages 4 and up because we have accessories here. Moving on to the back of the backing card, we again have that strong yellow and blue color scheme, and we have some nice toy photography here on the back with the figure out of the packaging holding the double-bladed lightsaber accessory. To introduce the character to Darth Maul for young fans who are perhaps not as familiar with the prequel movies, we have a small blurb here about the character. An agile Sith Lord, sinister Darth Maul wielded an intimidating double-bladed lightsaber and the power of the dark side. So introducing him as a Sith with a double-bladed lightsaber. The rest of the packaging here, we've got the barcode, copyright, all of that kind of stuff. Now, just to take a quick moment to compare it alongside a vintage collection card, here we have the Clone Wars Darth Maul Mandalore figure on a standard vintage collection backing card. You can see the very strong differences here in the design style. This one is obviously referencing the original Kenner backing cards. It's larger. We've got a lot more packaging off to the side opposed from the figure. Over here, the figure is taking up the bulk of the backing card. It's a little bit more cost effective, I feel. This one retails for about a third of the cost of this figure over here. I'm able to pick these ones up for a little under $10 here in New Zealand, whereas vintage collection retail for around $30 to $38 for certain characters. So this one is much more budget friendly for collectors on a budget or for younger fans perhaps getting into the collecting hobby with pocket money. And of course, the bright colors really stand out alongside the darker backing cards, especially on the toy store shelf. This one always grabs my attention. It's bright and vibrant and looks really fun, really centered on the toy. And somehow, because the toy takes up more space of the backing card, somehow feels like you're getting more toy, which is kind of funny considering that this one is so much cheaper than this one. The toy on this one feels a lot smaller because of course they are different scales, but I'm really curious to see how this one is going to look when I get it out of the packaging. So let's open it up. So now I have the Epic Hero Series Darth Maul figure out of the packaging, as well as the double-bladed lightsaber accessory. So let's get stuck in and check out the figure. So of course, he is pretty simply painted. The rest of his body is completely black. There is no painted details on his belt or anything like that. It's just black plastic all over. But of course, he makes up for it with an extremely well-painted face. This is really quite impressive for a simple, cheap toy. We've got a lot of Sith markings here, that really impressive sort of red and black tattoo there, and I gotta say The spikes, the sort of horns there at the top of his head are really nice. They're actually quite pointed, which is a little bit of an improvement over some of those Phantom Menace era figures. And I've got one on hand to do a bit of a quick comparison later. Really nice, tidy paintwork here, is, you know, especially considering those intricacies there on his patterns there. And he's even got Sith eyes in there, really small, you know, not too sort of googly-eyed, not very wide-eyed. Really nice detail there, and I'm quite impressed with it. You could see that through the packaging, but you know, somehow just taking them out of the plastic bubble really makes you appreciate the detail up close there. Really nice. And of course, we've got an articulated head. He has some really good range of motion there. Of course, he doesn't have hair at the back to really restrict that, but we can move his head all the way around, get some really nice posing going on there. When it comes to posing on the rest of his body, that's going to be a little bit of a limitation because, of course, he is only a 5-point of articulation, but we'll go over the sculpting quickly and then test out the articulation. So, of course, Darth Maul here is in his sort of end of the Phantom Menace dual robes, you know, where he's taken off his large cloak as we saw him on Tatooine. So he has just kind of these flowing black robes here, which works pretty well for the slightly sort of less detailed sculpting compared to the vintage collection line of figures. And it just looks pretty nice. You know, we've got some good draping here. It's not too straight, especially on the lower half. We've got different differentiation here. We've got a little bit more of a gloss for the tabards flowing over the bottom robes. There's a little bit of, I like that sort of different there in the sort of the sheen. It's all kind of shiny plastic, but I can actually see the tabards hanging down there opposed to the robes there. We do have a split at the sides to allow for, you know, hip movement there, which is nice to see. So it's not too limited. Of course, we do have a bit of a limited range of motion, but we've still got that sort of a rubbery lower half there, which is good. Now we do have a peg hole in the back, and I'll get to that a little bit more later. Just wanted to sort of point that out. And I do actually really like the level of detail on his boots here. There is a lot of detail. Of course, they were sort of off-the-shelf motorcycle boots if you've ever studied the Darth Maul costume, and there is a really good amount of detail replicated here. We've got those iconic sort of V shapes down the front and a lot of buckle detail going on the back, which is really quite nice. You can sort of see some of those quilting lines there in the back. Really nice. They aren't completely straight across the back. The toes do curl up a little bit, which means he's just a tiny bit unsteady on his feet compared to some of the other figures. He does stand up pretty nicely, but because they aren't dead flat, he's just a little bit more unsteady on his feet compared to some of the others. So I really like the sculpting. We've even got some of those sort of tiny little dome details on his belt here that goes all the way around. We've got those tiny little studs. Of course, if this was, you know, a different figure, we might have a few more sort of painted details, a little bit more difference in the textures, but for the price point of this figure, it's absolutely fantastic. So you can see I'm starting to play with some of the articulation. He's only 5-point, kind of akin to the old Kenner figures where we have head, arms, and legs. So I can move his arms all the way around. He's only going to hold his arm up. So that is about as much movement as we're going to get. It is not articulated at the elbows, at the wrists, or at the hands, anything like that. Just that one plane of movement. And again, on the legs, a little bit harder to show because of that sort of rubber lower half, but I can lift his leg up to about there before that plastic lower robe is going to limit the movement there, and a little bit more towards the back, again, limited by the robes. But these figures are kind of designed for, you know, just standing still poses, or perhaps sort of playing where you're holding on to the figure. Really simple movement. I mean, you know, kids in the 70s and 80s had the same level of articulation to play with, and they were certainly iconic. So sometimes you don't need all of those sort of articulation points for young fans. They will be sort of a point where potential breakage can occur because some of those joints are very, very small. And I always feel nervous with some of those articulation points. Some of them can be so small, I'm worried about breaking them. No worries about breaking them on this one. I think you'd have to be pretty rough to break one of these joints. Now, I will say, because his arms go up like this, we're not going to be able to move his hands close enough to get a two-handed grip on his double-bladed lightsaber, which is a shame because, of course, he does wield his double-bladed lightsaber mostly in a two-handed grip, and that is just not going to be possible. Also, his hands, as you can see, they're going to sort of cup together facing each other. So again, the hands are not even in a right grip. So even if we could bend them together, he's only going to be able to hold it sort of like a pole in front of him. So that is a bit of a shame. But, you know, for the sake of a simple toy, I think the sculpting looks really nice. So I mentioned that I had some other toys to compare to, but I just want to take a moment to look at this really cool lightsaber. And you can see this isn't broken. It does actually come apart. Now it is a little bit awkward because we've got this sort of peg that is shaped off the blade. It's made out of the same plastic. So if you pull them apart, this one looks a little bit odd. So you could probably use this one to be sort of, you know, when he's had his lightsaber broken in half. It's interesting that they were able to add that detail to it. It is a little bit sort of loose. It does sort of come apart a little bit easier. But yeah, I really like the level of detail on this hilt. There is a lot of sculpted detail. We've got all of those sort of iconic Darth Maul little knobs and rings and stuff like that. It looks really cool. And I love the brilliant silver paint here. It's a nice, good metallic. It's not a gray. It's a proper metallic silver finish. Now, I will say the one thing that is kind of letting this one down, the blades are a little bit short and they feel very pink in color, especially when I sort of put them close to Darth Maul's head. Of course, he is a very deep sort of red, classic red there. The blades start to look quite pink when I put them near him. So of course, because he's only raising his arm in that one direction, I'm going to have him holding the lower half of the lightsaber just because I don't want to sort of put too much stress on that particular joint. If I just put it in his hand like that, that's about as much as we're going to get because we can't rotate his hand to get more of a sort of across the body pose. Now the backing card art does actually have the character holding the lightsaber in two hands, but of course we can't do that. I cannot get them close and I can't rotate the hand to kind of get them across between those two hands. So he is going to be sort of fighting a bit like this, which, you know, is fine for younger fans that are not going to be doing complicated ones, you know, sort of do lightsaber fights sort of, you know, in this kind of motion. But for fans that are perhaps, you know, potentially buying this one for their sort of more display collection, the pose and holding the lightsaber is a little bit awkward. Probably looks a little bit better if I sort of hold it over the join. Being a bit careful there. Looks a little bit better like that, you know, sort of doing it directly over the join. But again, it's not a really sort of elegant pose. It's a little bit simple, but hey, not all of us are too fussed about doing complicated poses. I know for a lot of my figures, I just have them holding their weapon in a really simplistic pose because sometimes the balance and just it takes a long time to try to make them look realistic. So in terms of details, I noted that this one has a peg hole in the back. I'm just going to pop his lightsaber out of the way for a moment. He's got a peg hole on the back of his character, despite the fact that he doesn't come with anything to sort of attach here. So I've just got a recently released figure from the same wave. We have Moff Gideon. I just opened this one up. So as you can see, he has a cape, and if I take the cape off, we've got a peg hole and that same shaped peg hole on the back here. Because this toy line is kind of designed for, you know, young fans to be able to sort of mix and match accessories. So this one has a peg hole in his forearm because some of the characters have weapons and different things that can click into their forearm. So he has an attachment peg hole there, despite the fact that he does not actually come with an accessory to click into that. So I kind of just wanted to show that you can mix and match the accessories for young fans. So I can take the cloak off Moff Gideon and it fits onto Darth Maul. Of course, it's not exactly like the robes that he wears on Tatooine, but, you know, adventurous, maybe he, you know, likes the style and, you know, he could wear that one. But what I think is quite nice, especially for an adult collector, is you will notice that he does not actually have that forearm peg hole here. That was one of the unfortunate downsides to this figure. I think the sculpting and paintwork on the Moff Gideon figure was really cool, but he does have that very prominent hole in his forearm, whereas this Darth Maul figure does not. So that is a big sort of selling point, I think, because from the front he doesn't have any of those sort of play accessory attachment points, just on the back, and we're not really going to be posing him much from the back, not yet anyway. So I quite like that. He looks really good from the front. Of course, he does hold his lightsaber a little bit awkwardly, just trying to get him to stand up a little bit more steadily. He's a little bit unsteady. See, the Moff Gideon one has very flat boots. I find that he actually stands up very solidly. He stands up really nicely. I kind of wish the Darth Maul one had the same kind of boots. I know they're trying to be accurate to the original costume, But yeah, I thought that that was kind of fun, you know, having the element of being able to mix and match accessories. So it does encourage young fans to collect quite a few figures so they can mix and match and have different adventures beyond how we see them on a screen. So they look kind of cool, very similar in height actually there as well. Just thought that was fun because they've both got the horns there. So now that we've done a little bit of comparison with another epic hero figure, I wanted to take a look at one of the original Phantom Menace figures. So just as a point of reference, this figure here, as pictured on the back of an episode 1 backing card, this one is the Darth Maul Jedi Duel figure, which I have on hand because I was really keen to see how this new figure lines up with an old one. So already you can see we've got some differences here in terms of the sculpting of the face. We have slightly longer blades, and this one, despite being, you know, 25 years old, the red on the blades are not actually too bad. It hasn't faded too much over there. But just taking a quick look at the accessories, we can see that this one, the hilt is a little bit shorter. It is a bit more brilliant in silver color. This one looks a little bit more gray, and it did also have all of the sort of the painted elements, the little buttons and details. This one does not. Also, I don't believe this one splits in half. Some of them did. This one doesn't. This one can. But we can see that the hilt is slightly shorter, despite the fact that this one is a larger scale figure, 4 inches compared to 3.75, and the blades are unfortunately shorter as well. You can also see the color difference there. I'm not sure why they went with the sort of more of a pinker tone there compared to the bit more of a sort of classic lightsaber red color of the Phantom Menace figure. But those were a bit of a quick comparison with the accessories there. But let's have a look at the figures themselves. So if I put them side by side, we can really see the height difference there. 4 inches, 3.75 inch scale, but let's just do a quick little check of the actual height. So this figure is pretty much just a shade over 10 centimeters and also just a tiny bit over 4 inches. I think it's his horns that are just peeking past that scale there. So if we took it to the top of his head, he's probably bang on 4 inches. It's just the horns making him a little bit taller. And we can see that the Phantom Menace era figure is well below 4 inches because he is from the 3.75 inch scale. So just thought that was interesting to compare. But I really wanted to look at the detail of the costume. And I got to say, there's not a lot of difference in actually the sculpting of the costumes in terms of sort of the draping and that. We've perhaps got a little bit more fabric texture on this one. We've sort of got a little bit of sort of little dotting, but yes, and we've also got, this is the version with the gray shirt. There were some variations of this figure. This one has the gray undershirt. This one is pure black, but in terms of the sculpting, not too bad really. We've got all the sort of classic costume details there, but I think the differences are a little bit more stronger here on the back. You can really see the fabric sort of textures and a little bit more sculpting draping, particularly on this lower half coming in there. This one looking a little bit more simple by comparison there. Still got some good draping, but it's looking a little bit more like smooth plastic compared to the one from 1999. Now, the biggest difference I think between these figures is the faces. And I have to say, for a cheap figure aimed at a younger toy audience, the detail on this new Epic Hero series figure is just incredible. This one has a little bit of a no neck sort of shrug appearance going on. I feel like the neck proportions on this one is much better. I feel like the likeness of Darth Maul is better on this one. Of course, this one is a little bit faded. His head is made out of red plastic and it's gone a little bit pink over the time. But look at the difference in the horns. This one actually has horns. This one has knobs or bumps. They're kind of blunted. They're very round in appearance. They don't look like sort of zebra horns at all. These ones are much more pointed. They're almost sharp to the touch, and they both have really good sort of face patterns, but I feel like the expression on this one, he's got sort of a menacing expression on it, which I feel like fits with Darth Maul. This one just looks like he's a bit spooked or something. The eye paint gives him a bit more of sort of that wide-eyed, slightly sort of googly-eyed expression. This one looks like he's, you know, focused and actually sort of slightly squinting, which I kind of like for a Darth Maul figure. Yeah, it's just so different. It's sort of interesting. You know, Hasbro has been slowly improving their figures. You know, it's been 25 years since this one was released. This one is probably a lot cheaper than this one would have cost back in the day. But really, really cool. I think for the price point, this is a really cool figure compared to, you know, ones that we'd sort of have on our shelf from the Phantom Menace era. He's a little bit dusty because he's been on my shelf for a while. He's just a little bit dusty there. Sometimes those older figures get a little bit sticky. This one is just a tad bit sticky, but just wanted to sort of really show the differences in the face sculpt there. Considering that I know this one is targeted for younger fans, it's actually really good as a figure. Just the limitations on the sculpting for articulation, really. I think that's the main thing, because he's not going to be able to hold that lightsaber in sort of a classic two-handed pose like the original figures there. But considering some of the sort of, in more recent history, the 5-point of articulation that we got around Rogue One and Solo, I think these ones are not too bad, you know, especially considering the price point that we pay for these ones. I think this one's really cool. If you're a Darth Maul fan, you want a Darth Maul figure. He isn't a character that's actually made in the mainline Hasbro action figure toy lines too often. We tend to get a lot of his variations. We've got him from the Clone Wars and Solo, of course, so there's a lot of versions out there now. But for young fans that just want a cost-effective Darth Maul figure, this one is pretty cool. I love the face sculpt and the paint job on this one. I think it looks really good, and those spikes are actually quite sharp, so I feel like that's really quite cool. Just a shame about the lightsaber though. It does have that functionality of being able to split in it too, but it's just a little bit short and a little bit too pink for my opinion. But let's just take the lightsaber from the Phantom Menace one and see how well it's going to fit into his hand, because sometimes you can pick up accessories from sort of, you know, garage sale, thrift stores, things like that. If we were to swap it in, he actually holds that not too bad, actually. So if you've got one sort of knocking around in your toy box, you could perhaps swap out the accessories, because I think that looks much better. He's still going to have a slightly awkward grip, but having the slightly longer lightsaber, because he is taller than the figure, I feel like this one just looks a little too short and undersized for his slightly sort of taller height, because that is such a difference compared to the Phantom Menace era ones. But yeah, that looks really cool. So I know it's not fun to feel like you've got to go out and buy a second thing to make the thing that you've just paid for sort of really complete, but he actually looks really cool with that lightsaber. I think that that's fun. So there we go. I think the figure is cool. I think the accessory lets it down a little bit. If you just want like a Darth Maul figure to put on a shelf, he looks really good. The toy definitely feels a little bit more like a children's toy accessory. I felt the same way with the staff that came with the Moff Gideon figure as well. The Moff Gideon figure looks really cool, but when you put the staff accessory in his hands, it starts to look a little bit more like a toy intended for a younger collector, younger sort of fans there to play with. But the figure by itself, really cool. Of course, he's not going to fit in with your 3.75-inch action figure collection. He is too tall to match in with those. But if you're just looking for something to add to perhaps a focus collection, perhaps you collect Darth Maul items, you're really a big fan of Darth Maul and want to put a figure on your desk or in your workspace, this is going to be a great, affordable, cost-effective way to add a little bit more of Darth Maul to your life. And I think he looks really cool. Really happy he doesn't have that attachment point on his arm, because I think that would be very distracting, because he doesn't have details, quite fine details on his gauntlets like some of the other characters do. And I don't really feel like he would need to have like a vibro knife or a hollow shield on his arm. So I'm glad that they didn't include that on this figure. And we've got that thing on the back so you can jam backpacks, jetpacks, capes, all of that sort of stuff onto his back if you have other figures from the collection. So that's a fun play feature for younger fans there. So overall, I think this is fun, especially for the price point. And I'm glad I have this Darth Maul figure for my collection, because I am a fan of the prequels. I grew up with the Phantom Menace on repeat. So this was a really fun one. I'm hoping to see more prequel figures in the Epic Hero series line. I think this is fun, especially with the newer generation of fans coming in, with their parents having grown up with the prequels. You know, I want, you know, the younger generation to have prequel figures available, because sometimes they are harder to find. So this was a really fun unboxing. I'm really happy to have this figure for my collection. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars action figure, checked out all of the details, did a bit of comparison, and had a lot of fun. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're an Epic Hero series fan, I recently opened up the Moff Gideon figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole Epic Hero series playlist. This is the way.